This happened during spring break about 4 years ago. My girlfriend, Anna, wanted to do something very low-key. She had been talking about going on a cabin trip for months. She just wanted somewhere to disappear for a few days, with absolutely no obligations and no stress from school. Her brother, Hunter, was on break from his university at the time, and he was staying with us in our apartment anyway, so we decided he should come along with us. I started looking for places to rent online, and after searching for a while I found a cabin deep in the woods. It was in a very remote area, which was exactly what we were looking for. The strangest thing about it was that it was cheaper than it had any right to be. I remember thinking about that for a brief moment, wondering why such a nice-looking cabin was so inexpensive, but then I just brushed it off and did not think about it again. We packed up our things and made the drive on a Friday afternoon, arriving at the property around dinner time. The place felt genuinely cut off from the rest of the world. Once we pulled up and parked the car, I realized you could not even see the main road we had just driven on from the front porch. I actually really liked that level of isolation at the time, thinking it would make for a peaceful weekend. But as we were walking around the property to stretch our legs after the long drive, we noticed an outbuilding off to the side of the yard. It was a large wooden shed, and the door was secured with a heavy padlock. Hunter walked over to it and began playing with the lock for a second. He looked back at me and said that the lock looked brand new, like it had been swapped out very recently, while the rest of the shed looked incredibly old and weathered. I shrugged it off and told him it was probably just the owner, keeping some expensive tools or maintenance equipment in there. We did not really think much of it after that. It was starting to get dark, and the temperature was dropping, so we went inside the cabin and immediately started preparing some dinner. That first night was actually completely fine. We had a few drinks on the back porch, talked about school, and went to bed pretty early. I cannot remember the exact time, but it started lightly raining at some point during the night. The woods around us were incredibly loud, which was a major surprise to me. It was this constant, heavy wall of sound made up of thousands of insects and frogs, and something about that noise was actually really calming. I do want to mention that at some point before falling asleep that night, I thought I heard something larger moving around in the brush outside. I did not panic because I figured it was just a deer or some other harmless animal. I fell asleep not long after that. What woke me up later was a sudden sharp sound. It sounded like something heavy had hit the side of the wooden cabin. I do not know what time it was exactly, but let us just say it was around 2 in the morning. I froze there in bed for a minute, completely still, listening closely and wondering if what I had heard was just a part of my dream or if it had actually happened. Right when I was about to try falling back asleep, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me, I heard another loud thump. It sounded identical to the first one, right against the exterior wall of our bedroom. I rolled over slowly to see if Anna was awake, but she was fast asleep, completely undisturbed by the noise. At that point, I knew it was up to me to investigate. I really did not want to get out of bed, but I kept thinking that if there was a bear poking around our trash or trying to get into the cabin, it would be much better to know about it than to just lie there in the dark. So, I reluctantly slid out of bed, trying not to make the floorboards creak, and grabbed one of our heavy flashlights from the kitchen counter. I really did not want to go outside into the dark rain, so I decided to look through the windows first. The outdoor visibility through the cabin windows was extremely limited because of the thick trees and the pouring rain. Despite the darkness, as I scanned the ground near the padlocked outbuilding with my eyes adjusting to the shadows, I noticed what appeared to be fresh footprints in the mud. This was incredibly alarming to me. Those footprints could not have been ours, because none of us had gone outside the cabin after the rain had started, at least not to my knowledge. I tried to reason with myself, thinking that it was possible Hunter had gone outside to get something from the car, or just to look around without me realizing it. I figured I would just ask him about it in the morning to clear things up. Still, deep down, I was pretty confident that he would not have gone out into a rainstorm in the middle of the night, which made the situation feel all the more eerie. The footprints did not look like they belonged to any animal, although they were too far away for me to tell for sure. And if I had been unwilling to go outside earlier, There was absolutely no chance I was going to open that door now after seeing those tracks. I made sure the front and back doors were locked tightly and went back to bed, hoping to get some rest. Unfortunately, the night was far from over. I woke up a few hours later to a loud, aggressive knocking on the front door. This is truly one of the most terrifying things I can imagine waking up to when you are in the middle of nowhere. Hearing that knocking meant there was a real, living stranger standing right on our porch in the pitch black. My heart immediately started racing, pounding heavily in my chest. It was just so incredibly late. I could not think of a single good, logical reason why someone would be knocking on a remote cabin door in the middle of the woods at 4 in the morning. The loud banging woke up Anna as well, and she was instantly terrified, about 10 times more scared than I was. She gripped my arm, shivering. I knew I had to do something, so I slowly got out of bed and walked over to the front door, keeping my footsteps as silent as possible. Before I could even announce myself or ask who was there, the person on the other side of the door spoke up. He said he was a forest ranger, and that there had been some kind of major incident in the immediate area. He claimed he needed to do a quick welfare check on whoever was staying in the cabin. I paused for a long moment before responding, mostly out of sheer fear, but it was obvious he already knew I was standing right behind the door. I decided to keep the door shut and locked. I told him through the wood that we were all completely good and did not need to be checked up on. I told him we were just trying to sleep and asked him to leave. I thought that would do the trick and he would walk away, because there was a long, heavy silence on the other side. But instead of leaving, the man spoke again, his voice dropping. He said he would need us to open the door so he could ask us a few routine questions. At that point, I became instantly suspicious. I was almost fully confident that the person standing on our porch in the middle of the night was not any kind of law enforcement or forest ranger. Right around then, Hunter woke up from the noise and crept out of his room, standing right behind me in the hallway. I leaned in and whispered to him to call the police immediately. I told him I would try to stall the guy at the door for as long as I could. I started talking back and forth with the man outside, giving him very vague, nothing answers to his questions, making sure not to let him know that we were suspicious of him. After a few minutes of this tense back and forth, Hunter walked back up to me, his face pale in the dim light. He whispered in my ear that he had reached the local police dispatcher, and they told him that absolutely no forest rangers had been dispatched to our area tonight. Hearing Hunter actually vocalize those words made my heart rate kick up to a whole new level. I was completely terrified and downright panicking. It was 4 in the morning, we were truly in the middle of nowhere, and some strange man was banging on our door pretending to be a ranger. I do not know how, but it felt like the person on the porch could sense my sudden spike in fear. His voice completely changed, losing any polite tone it had left. He raised his voice and started banging on the door much harder, making the wooden frame shake. I yelled back at him, telling him that I knew he was not a ranger, that I was not going to open the door, and that we were not going to answer any of his questions. This only seemed to make him furious. He started demanding that I open the door right now, threatening to kick the heavy wood down and telling me that I would be arrested for failure to comply with an officer. That is when Anna could not take the terror anymore, and she screamed at him to go away. Hearing her voice only made things worse. The man began violently kicking the door with his boots, trying to force his way inside. When the lock held and the door did not give, we heard him stomp off the porch and start walking around the side of the cabin. I yelled at Anna to run into the bathroom and lock herself inside, which she did immediately. Hunter and I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knives we could find. We stood there in the dark, tracking the heavy, stomping sounds of the man as he moved around the exterior of the cabin. I was beyond terrified, my hands shaking as I held the knife, but I knew I had no choice but to prepare for a physical fight. This guy clearly meant us serious harm, and it felt like he was trying to break in to kill us. Before I could even think about what to do next, one of the side windows shattered into a million pieces. The man had thrown a massive rock right through the glass. I held my breath, fully expecting him to climb through the broken window frame, but he did not. It was the absolute tensest, most terrifying moment of my entire life. Just standing there in the dark, staring at a shattered window, waiting for an attacker to jump through. After what felt like an absolute eternity, with Hunter and me frozen in place staring at the broken glass, we finally heard the beautiful sound of police sirens approaching in the distance. The loud wailing of the sirens got closer and closer, and we heard the heavy footsteps of the man running away into the deep woods. I will fast forward through this next part. The police arrived and searched the surrounding woods with flashlights and dogs, but miraculously they could not find the guy. Hunter was absolutely furious. He was practically yelling at the officers, telling them that the freak had been right on our property less than a minute before they arrived. So there was no way he could have gone far. The officers just shrugged and said there was nothing more they could do in the dark, and they advised us to just pack up our things and leave immediately. So that is exactly what we did. We threw our bags into the car and got out of there as fast as we could. It is not like we had much of a choice anyway with a shattered window and a psychopath running around the woods. But as we drove away, Hunter could not let go of how incompetent those officers had been. It was only after the initial fear and adrenaline finally began to wear off, as the sun was starting to rise over the highway, that I realized how truly insane the whole situation was. For someone to even know about that specific cheap cabin in the first place was so unlikely. It felt like they had planned this whole thing out, waiting for unsuspecting travelers to rent it. And what that man actually wanted from us was a dark mystery in and of itself that I still think about to this day. It was an extremely uncomfortable and deeply unsettling experience. Let us transition to another story that happened a bit further back. This happened back in the year 2016 when I was a senior in college. I was a member of a fraternity called TKE, and one of the biggest traditions that came with being in Greek life at our school was that you spent your spring break with your fraternity brothers and whatever sororities you were close with. The groups for these trips were typically huge, usually consisting of 30 or 40 people, and everyone would pack into the exact same rental house or resort for the entire week. I won't say it was the most wholesome or safe experience you could have in your early 20s, but I also won't pretend that I did not have a ridiculous amount of fun doing it. That particular year, the big plan was to go to Acapulco, Mexico. I do not remember whose idea it was originally, but within a few weeks, we had about 40 people booked at this large resort right on the Pacific coast. Now, the main character in this story is not actually me. It is my close friend and fraternity brother Sahil. I am going to try to put this as nicely as possible, but Sahil was the kind of person who, no matter what situation you put him in, was always going to find a way to make it much louder and more complicated than it ever needed to be. I say that with total affection, because Sahil was genuinely one of the best and most loyal people I knew in college. He just had absolutely zero self-preservation instincts and absolutely no impulse control, which was especially problematic because he was incredibly impulsive by nature. We were maybe 3 or 4 days into the trip when a group of us decided to head out to the local clubs in the city. It was a great time, the music was loud, and everyone was dancing, right up until Sahil, true to form, began scanning the crowded room, looking for someone who could get him something a little stronger than what was in his plastic cup. I am not going to bother spelling things out for you, but it should not be too hard to connect the dots and figure out what he was looking for. It was an incredibly terrible idea. We were in a foreign country, in a major city with a reputation that was not exactly clean or safe for tourists, and to make matters worse, absolutely nobody in our immediate group spoke any Spanish. I walked over to Sahil and told him to drop it and just enjoy the party. A couple of the other guys in our fraternity said the exact same thing, and Sahil nodded and said he would let it go. But I knew him too well, and I knew he would not actually stop. I had been through this kind of situation with him too many times before. We tried to keep an eye on him for a while, but the club was genuinely enormous, packed with hundreds of people, and after a while we lost track of where he was. He was a grown man, and I was not about to waste my entire night babysitting him, so I figured he was just somewhere in the crowd having fun. Sahil disappearing into a crowd was a very common occurrence, so none of us worried at first. I went about my night with my other friends, drinking and dancing, and we had an amazing time. But Sahil never turned back up, which I started to find stranger and stranger the later it got. I do not remember what exactly triggered the sudden shift, but one second we were all drinking and partying, and the next second, we all stopped and realized we had not seen Sahil in hours. We frantically began trying to contact him. He was not answering anyone's text messages, and whenever we tried to call his phone, it went straight to voicemail, which meant his battery was completely dead. That was not a good sign at all. Sahil may have been a crazy and impulsive dude, but he was an organizational freak when it came to his technology. He would never just let his phone die like that while out in a foreign city. After waiting around a little while longer and getting no response, we made the collective decision to leave the club. We reasoned that the odds were he had probably just headed back to the resort on his own, and we would find him passed out in his bed. The sidewalk outside the club was a massive, chaotic mess of tourists and locals, trying to hail cabs all at once, so a few of us decided to walk about a block and a half away from the crowd before pulling out our phones to call a driver. It was probably around 1 in the morning, and we were just standing there on the dark street corner, waiting for our driver to arrive, when who do we see but Sahil, stumbling towards us out of the darkness. We immediately ran up to him, and it was instantly obvious that something seriously bad had happened to him. He was a complete physical wreck. His shirt was torn almost completely off his body, and his face was severely swollen with dark bruises forming around his eyes, not to mention the fact that he was limping heavily as he walked. We quickly got him into the car when our driver arrived and rushed him back to our resort. A couple of the guys kept frantically asking him what had happened, but Sahil just stared out the window, shaking his head and saying he would explain everything later. It was only when we were safely back in one of our hotel rooms, away from the crowds, that he finally sat down on the bed and started talking. He told us that while he was at the bar in the club, he had managed to find a guy, a short Mexican man who did not speak much English at all. But this man had a friend with him who was acting as a translator. Sahil made it very clear to the translator what he was looking to buy, and the short guy seemed to understand immediately. Sahil told us that he felt a bit reluctant right away, because something felt very off about the translator specifically, but because he wanted what he wanted, he could not put his finger on the danger. Then, the short guy pulled out a small sample of the substance and offered it to Sahil right there in the corner of the bar. Sahil tried it, said it was good, and that is exactly where any remaining good judgment he had completely evaporated. After that, the short guy told the translator to tell Sahil that they could not do the actual business transaction inside the crowded club. He told Sahil to follow them outside to where their car was parked. Sahil knew deep down that he should not have gone, but his lack of impulse control took over, and he followed them anyway. They walked out of a quiet side exit of the club, and there was a dark car waiting just outside the door. Before Sahil could really understand what was happening or make a decision to turn back, the translator and the short man grabbed him by his arms and pulled him into the back seat of the car, slamming the doors shut. The car immediately sped off into the dark city streets. Sahil said they drove for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes, but he was panicking so hard and his mind was racing, so he honestly could not be sure of the time. What he was absolutely sure about, though, was that the two men began aggressively rummaging through his pockets the very second the car started moving. They were robbing him. When Sahil tried to resist and push their hands away, they began to beat him senseless, punching him repeatedly in the face and body. They grabbed his phone, smashed it, and stripped him of his wallet, his watch, and everything else of value. What ended up saving his life was a bizarre conversation that happened during the drive. At some point, while Sahil was bleeding in the back seat, the translator turned around and asked him why there were so many young Americans in the city right now. Sahil, without really thinking about the consequences, desperately explained that he was there for spring break with dozens of his fraternity brothers and sorority sisters, and that they were all staying at a major, highly secure resort nearby. He had no idea at the time, but he was essentially talking his way out of being killed or trafficked. Hearing that Sahil was part of a massive, organized group of 40 American tourists who would immediately notice he was missing and alert the resort security, and the authorities made the kidnappers hesitate, the two men began arguing loudly, back and forth in Spanish for several minutes, gesturing wildly. Then, without warning, the driver pulled the car over to the side of a dark, empty road and threw Sahil out of the door onto the dirt. He landed hard, scraping his knees and elbows, and watched the car speed away. He was left on a random road he did not recognize at all, in the middle of the night, with no phone and no money. He had no choice but to just start walking in the direction he thought the car had driven, hoping to find some signs of life. By some absolute miracle, he ended up walking in the right direction and stumbled back onto the main strip where we were waiting for our cab. I really do not know what would have happened to him had he not run into us, or if he had left that club just 20 minutes sooner. We debated calling the police for about 3 seconds before realizing that was the worst idea for everyone involved. Besides our immediate group, nobody else at the resort ever found out what happened to Sahil. Now, let us move on to the third and final story, which is perhaps the most bizarre and lingering mystery of them all. This is something I have been keeping bottled up inside me for quite a while now. This happened during the spring break of my junior year of college. I graduated a few years ago, so we are going back a bit, but the details are still fresh in my mind. Before I begin, I should mention that I am naturally a very paranoid person. I have always been highly observant, skeptical, and cynical of people and situations. Those honestly are not the healthiest traits to have in everyday life, as I end up spending way too much time overthinking things and worrying about scenarios that do not matter. But I simply cannot control it. My ex-girlfriend Anna had a very close friend named Lena. Lena was the type of girl who always knew where the party was. She was plugged into every single group chat, social circle, and event page imaginable. That is why it was not surprising in the slightest when she approached Anna with an exciting plan for spring break. She said that a girl she knew from another class had told her about an incredible lake house trip out in the Ozarks. According to Lena, a bunch of people from that girl's sorority and some of their affiliated fraternities were renting this massive house right on the water for the entire week. It sounded like a pretty standard fun college trip, to be completely honest. I was not exactly the spring break party type, but Anna really wanted to go, and I did not have any real reason to say no. So I figured, what the hell, let us go. There were 4 of us making the trip together. It was myself, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend, Colby. Colby generously offered to drive us all because he had the biggest SUV, which was pretty chill of him. It was a very long but surprisingly good drive. Everyone was in a fantastic mood, singing along to the radio and talking about how fun the week was going to be. The final stretch of the drive was on this long, twisting, narrow road that wound around the lake, with very few other houses in sight. We finally pulled up to the rental house around 5 in the afternoon, and my very first thought was that Lena had severely undersold this place. The house was absolutely massive, positioned right on the edge of the lake, with a humongous wraparound wooden deck, and a private dock that stretched way out over the calm water. It was the kind of luxury house that makes you wonder who actually owns it and how they can afford it. There were also way more cars parked in the front of the house than I was expecting to see. Lena had made it sound like there would only be 15 to 20 people there, but as I looked around, I counted at least 25 cars parked in a makeshift grass lot next to the house, with even more cars lined up down the side of the road, because there was simply no room left in the driveway. That is where Colby was forced to park his SUV. We grabbed our bags and walked up the front steps to the main entrance. As we approached, we saw a guy standing near the front door. He seemed to be about our age, maybe a little bit older. He smiled warmly and introduced himself to us, but I do not remember his name, so for the sake of the story, I will just call him the host. He seemed friendly enough at first glance, but because of my paranoid nature, the very first thing I clocked about him was that his speech sounded highly rehearsed. It felt like he had had this exact same conversation multiple times already that day. And to be fair, he probably had, but it still felt very weird and artificial to me. You know those safety speeches that fraternity pledges have to give you before they let you into a house party? It felt exactly like that. He gave us the whole rundown of the property. He told us where to find our rooms, how to navigate the large house, and what time we could do certain activities. It was all very typical house rule stuff. But then he brought up the car keys. He told us that the roads around the lake were extremely narrow and dangerous at night, especially after people had been drinking. He said that for liability reasons, and to keep everyone safe, they were collecting everyone's car keys at the front door. He had this whole little polished speech prepared about it. Colby sort of shrugged his shoulders and did not think much of it before handing his keys over to the host. The host made a big show of thanking Colby for playing by the rules, which I thought was incredibly obnoxious. Then he opened the front door and let us inside. I made a silent mental note of what he was doing with those keys, and as we walked in, I was pleasantly surprised to see a massive glass bowl filled to the brim, with other car keys sitting on a table in the foyer. The host tossed Colby's keys into the bowl with the others, told us to have an amazing time, and then stepped back outside, closing the door behind us. We went upstairs and found our assigned room, which was actually really nice, featuring 2 double beds and a tiny private balcony that overlooked the water. We quickly unpacked our bags, put our clothes away, and headed back downstairs to see what was going on. Lena was really eager to find her sorority friends, so we followed her through the hallways. It did not take us long to figure out where the main party was happening. It was in this giant open lounge on the first floor that was lined with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, giving you a beautiful wraparound view of the lake. It was honestly pretty awesome. There must have been at least 30 people hanging out in that one massive room, drinking and talking. But the weird thing was that Lena did not recognize a single one of them. She stood there looking around, getting more and more confused. They all looked like typical college kids, Greek life students even, but Lena could not find her friend, or anyone else she had ever seen before in the crowd. I did not want to just stand there awkwardly in the corner, so I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a couple of cold beers for myself and Colby, and made my way over to a pool table that nobody was currently using. I have never had a hard time connecting with new people, so I did not really care that we did not know anyone yet. Colby did not seem to care either. We played pool, drank our beers, and just enjoyed the positive vibe of the party. Our girlfriends came over to join us a little later, and Lena told us that her friend still was not answering her phone calls or text messages. They seemed a bit overly concerned about it, but Colby and I told them it was completely fine, and that she was probably just busy or drinking somewhere. I am not going to lie, that first night was actually really fun. Colby and I socialized with a bunch of different people who all seemed really cool and laid back. Anna and Lena got along great with the other girls, and there seemed to be an unlimited supply of alcohol, food, and party games. But there was one specific thing that kept nagging at me despite all the fun I was having. It was the host. He was not really partying with anyone, but he was always there, slowly walking through the rooms, watching everyone, and occasionally talking to people in a very hushed tone. My first thought was that he was just doing some other substances in a back room with a select few people, but I felt like that was unlikely because I never once saw a drink or a cup in his hand the entire night. At one point, I happened to glance over and saw him standing near the back door holding a clipboard. It was an actual physical clipboard with sheets of paper on it, and he was actively writing something down while looking at the crowd. It felt incredibly out of place for a wild college spring break party. As the night went on, I noticed that most of the party felt like strangers trying to get to know each other, which is what I expected. But there were maybe 8 to 10 people there who interacted with each other in a very different way. At first, I thought they were just a big group of close friends who had traveled together. But I could not help but notice that some of these people, who seemed very familiar with one another, would introduce themselves to each other during games as if they had never met. It was like they were pretending. As more time passed, I also realized that the 4 of us were not merging with some larger group, but rather the entire party was split into small, isolated groups of 3 or 4 people, just like ours. Besides those 10 or so people who seemed to be running things, nobody actually knew anyone else beyond the small group they had arrived with. I mentioned this strange observation to Anna, but she just laughed and told me that I was overthinking things as usual, which was probably true. She was also pretty wasted at that point, so I did not want to ruin her night by being paranoid and complicated. Lena's friend never showed up that first night, but we all eventually went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up much earlier than everyone else in the house. I quietly went downstairs to the kitchen, made myself a cup of hot coffee, and went out onto the massive deck to sit by myself for a while in the cool morning air. I happened to glance over at the foyer on my way out, and I made a note of the fact that the glass bowl filled with everyone's car keys was no longer sitting on the table by the front door. It was completely gone, which I found a little bit odd. I wanted to be left alone, so I chose to sit on the far side of the house where I had the driveway to my left and the quiet water to my right. It was actually extremely peaceful. Around mid-morning, as people were slowly starting to wake up, I noticed a young couple whom I had seen at the party the night before packing up their bags and carrying them to their car. They said quick goodbyes to a few people standing on the porch, got into their car, and I watched them drive out of sight down the long road. Fast forward to later that night, and we were all sitting around a massive bonfire in the backyard near the lake. I was sitting with Anna and a few other people, laughing and talking, when I happened to glance across the roaring fire toward the far end of the circle. There was a couple sitting together on a log, positioned slightly further back from the main group in the shadows. They were positioned with the bright fire directly between us, making it very hard to get a clean, clear look at them, but I kept watching them. Suddenly, my stomach dropped. I realized it was the exact same guy and girl from earlier that morning, the ones I had watched pack their bags, say goodbye, and drive away. I was absolutely dead certain of it. I leaned over and whispered to Anna, pointing them out, but she just gave me a highly confused look. She had not personally seen them leave that morning, so she probably just assumed that I was misremembering things or getting people confused. I knew what I saw, and there was no way I was going to let it go. So instead of arguing with her, I got up from the bonfire and immediately made my way through the dark house. I remembered exactly which car was theirs and where it had been parked in the grass lot, so I was going to see if their car was actually still gone. I made my way to the front yard and looked around the crowded grass lot. To my absolute surprise, their car was indeed gone. It was nowhere to be found. Despite that, I was positive that the people I had seen sitting by the fire were the same ones who had supposedly left. But by the time I walked back to the backyard, they were gone from the bonfire. I searched the house, but I could not find them anywhere, and it bugged me for the rest of the night. I did not bother telling Colby or Lena about it because I knew they would just laugh, and every single time I tried to mention it to Anna, she rolled her eyes and told me I was being a psychotic, paranoid buzzkill. The next morning, I made it a point to wake up really early again. I decided I was going to go for a long walk down the road. I was not entirely sure what I was looking for, but I felt this deep, growing need to convince myself that I was not trapped, and that there was something real outside of that house and those people. I walked about a quarter of a mile down the narrow road, past a sharp bend where you could no longer see the house at all. Off to the side, there was an old equipment shed, some kind of storage building used by groundskeeping staff. I walked around to the back of the shed, and my jaw damn near hit the dirt. There, parked tightly against the back wall, where it was completely invisible from the road, was the couple's car. I just stood there in the quiet woods, staring at it. I do not know how long I stood there. I was not even scared at first. It was more like a cold confirmation of something I already knew deep down, but had not been able to prove until now. They had made a big show of saying goodbye and driving away, only to hide their car behind a shed and sneak back into the house. Why would anyone do that? I turned around and walked back to the house without saying a word to anyone. I was starting to seriously freak out. I started thinking about those people they had been saying goodbye to on the porch, and I wondered if they were all in on some kind of sick game. I knew I had to find out what was going on. That afternoon, I finally spotted that couple walking near the boat dock. It had taken me a really long time to find them, and I had to make up some stupid excuse to tell Anna so she would not follow me. I did not even try to sugarcoat it or be polite. I walked right up to them and bluntly asked them why their car was parked behind the equipment shed down the road when they had supposedly left yesterday morning. They both stopped and gave me a very funny, cold look. They acted like I was completely crazy, but I could tell my question had struck a major nerve. I swear to God, though, it was like everyone around us could hear our conversation. There were not even that many people nearby, but the moment I asked that question, the entire area around the dock quieted down. The music from a nearby speaker seemed to fade, and I could not help but feel like dozens of cold eyes were suddenly locked onto me. Luckily, Anna appeared out of nowhere, grabbed my arm, and told me to come have a drink with her. I initially wanted to press the couple for answers, but the heavy, hostile way everyone else reacted made me feel deeply uncomfortable in a way that is hard to describe. I walked back to our room with Anna and told her everything. When I brought up the exact location of the hidden car, she finally realized I was not just being paranoid. She took me seriously. She then went on to tell me that she had actually picked up on some weird stuff herself over the past day. She said that some of the girls she had been talking to had almost identical backstories, almost word for word, as if they had memorized a script. I immediately suggested that we pack our bags and leave early, but Anna told me that was probably premature and might cause a scene. Either way, the terrible gut feeling I had gotten on the very first day was getting worse and worse. By the time I woke up the next morning, I had made the absolute decision that we were leaving today. Anna agreed with me, but Colby and Lena were a completely different story. When we told them we wanted to go, Colby straight up laughed in my face. He told me he was not about to cut his spring break trip short just because I had some wild conspiracy theory about a parked car. Lena admitted that it was weird that her friend had basically ghosted her, and that she did not recognize a single person in the massive house. But she said she was not ready to panic and leave a free party over it. We argued back and forth in our room for a while, and I was actually stunned by how stubborn and blind they were both being. It was not like Anna and I could just leave on our own. We did not have our own car, and we absolutely needed Colby's SUV to get home. We ended up reaching a tense compromise. The plan was to stay for one final night, and then we would all leave first thing in the morning. I was reluctantly cool with that plan until we actually went downstairs to the kitchen to get some breakfast. The moment we walked into the room, every single set of eyes turned to look at me. I felt it instantly, and I hated it. It was not obvious or loud, and I tried desperately to convince myself that I was just having a paranoid freak out, but people were definitely staring at me. A lot of people. I found this incredibly off-putting because most of the people who were staring at me had not even been near the dock when I questioned that couple yesterday. It meant the story had spread. I started feeling this overwhelming sensation that something really, really terrible was going to happen to us if we stayed in that house for even a single moment longer. Anna felt the hostile eyes on us too, because she leaned in close and whispered to me that everyone was looking. That was the final straw. I got up from where we were sitting, walked right across the room, and approached the host who was standing near the corner. I told him flat out that we had a family emergency, that we had to take off immediately, and that I needed our car key back. He looked at me and smiled like a literal robot. He asked if everything was okay in this overly sweet, fake voice. I told him again that something important had come up and we needed to head home right away. To which he actually responded by asking, "What happened?" He was trying to probe me. I had not thought of a specific fake excuse to give him, so I just repeated that it was a family emergency and we had to go. He kept trying to divert the conversation, saying things like, "Some people have planned a really cool boat trip on the lake for this evening, and you know the parties always get much better as the end of the week approaches." He was doing absolutely everything in his power to convince me to stay, all while staring at me with that creepy, unchanging smile. I did not care about his fake politeness. I looked him dead in the eye and told him again firmly that I needed the keys to our car right now. I cannot verbally explain to you how awful and heavy that feeling was in the room. There was a space filled with at least 20 people, and every single one of them had stopped talking. They were all staring directly at me in complete silence. The host's smile slowly faded, and his charming gentleman act was completely gone. He did not smile anymore. He just gave me this blank, cold, dead-eyed look that creeped me out to my very core. Suddenly, some random girl who was sitting at a nearby table broke the heavy silence. She looked at me, scowled, and said that leaving was not a good idea. I turned around to look at her, shocked, and she just kept glaring at me. I did not know what to say to that. I looked across the quiet room and saw Anna, Lena, and Colby. They all looked absolutely horrified. The host finally broke the silence, saying, "Okay, fine," in a very flat, cold voice. He told me to follow him inside the back hallway to get the keys. I saw Anna start to get up from her seat to follow me, but the moment the host saw her move, he snapped his hand out in front of her. He barked, "No!" in a loud, aggressive, and dominant way that genuinely startled all of us. It was almost violent. He glared at her and told her that only I was allowed to follow him to the back room. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to get those keys, so I followed him. He led me through a confusing maze of narrow, dark hallways before we finally reached a locked room. Hanging on the wall were dozens of hooks, each one holding a set of car keys. He did not even ask me which set belonged to Colby's SUV. He walked straight over to a specific hook and took them down, because he clearly already knew exactly which keys were ours. I was terrified that he was going to attack me in that isolated room, or refuse to hand them over, but he just placed them in my hand. He leaned in close, looked at me with those dead eyes, and said that I was making a very big mistake. I did not give a single about what he had to say. The second my fingers wrapped around those keys, I turned around and ran back through the hallways to my group. When I stepped back into the main room, it was like a switch had been flipped. The music was suddenly blasting again, and people were laughing, talking, and drinking as if absolutely nothing had happened. It was incredibly freaky. Anna, Colby, and Lena were standing in the exact same spot, looking terrified. I grabbed Anna's hand and told them we were leaving right now. We ran upstairs, threw our clothes into our bags, and were packed and out of that house in less than 10 minutes. The entire time we were walking down the steps, I felt this intense dread, like someone was going to jump out of the bushes or block the driveway to stop us from leaving. But miraculously, nobody did. As Colby started the engine and began driving quickly down the road, I looked out the window back at the house to see the most unsettling sight of all. There were about a dozen people standing in a perfect, silent line on the massive wooden deck, completely still, watching us drive away. I could also see a couple of other people staring down at us through the upper windows. It pretty much confirmed what I had been suspecting all along. There was something deeply wrong with that house and those people. For the rest of our spring break, Lena tried desperately to get in touch with the girl from her class, who had supposedly organized and invited her to the lake house trip. She called her, texted her, and tried reaching out on every single social media platform she could think of, but she got absolutely nothing back. She was starting to worry that something terrible had actually happened to her. It was not until we finally got back to school a week later that Lena was finally able to track the girl down in person on campus. And this is honestly the craziest, most chilling part of the entire story. It turned out that the girl's phone had been stolen about 2 weeks before spring break even started. She had gotten a completely new phone and a new number, but had not had the chance to update everyone in her contacts yet. The person who had been texting Lena, sending her the details, and inviting her to the Ozarks Lake House was not her classmate at all. It was a complete stranger who had stolen the phone. Not a single message had actually come from her friend. We talked about going to the police, but as we sat down and thought about it, we realized we could not even articulate what crime had actually been committed against us. We went to a party, we stayed in a house, and we left. Nobody technically did anything illegal to us, but the entire setup was so elaborate. And it was off to the point where I will always believe that if we had stayed for just one more night, something unspeakable would have happened to us. It is a mystery that I will never stop thinking about. When you look back at all three of these stories, they all share a terrifying common thread. They show how easily our desire for fun, escape, and adventure during spring break can be weaponized against us by people with dark intentions. Whether it is a fake forest ranger targeting an isolated cabin in the woods, predatory criminals looking to kidnap and rob vulnerable tourists in foreign cities, or an organized cult-like group setup designed to lure unsuspecting college students to a remote lake house under false pretenses, these events serve as a chilling reminder that danger is always lurking just beneath the surface of our most anticipated trips. It is crucial to always stay vigilant, trust your gut instincts when something feels off, and never let your guard down, because sometimes the traps are set long before you even arrive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.